PDFs. Yeah. Okay, we're in. Ask your question.
So people have stopped buying 40-ounce bottles, and it's like the 25-ounce cans nowadays. I didn't know that they had 25-ounce cans.
There's a reason why they do that. So, for example, today's subject, we're talking about cultural competency. Usually that's dealing with people, but it's also dealing with corporations and why they do what they do, since the Supreme Court thinks that corporations are people. Okay? So when we get to the pharmacology part, I'm going to teach you to translate different alcohol strengths into dosages. Okay? So if you understand that every day a 757 worth of people dies from alcohol alone, that translates into 150,000 people.
A year?
A year. And that's the year 2000 stat. Okay? Surgeon General report. Excess deaths, mortality, and morbidity. So what that represents is this. Those are people that are dying from using alcohol the way the manufacturer intended. That's not even the murders. That is not even drunk driving crashes. That's people drinking alcohol, overdosing on alcohol, okay? Liver cancer, cirrhosis, stomach cancer. That's people dying from using the drug, not from what they did on the drug, just drug effect, right? So just like the 450,000 people that year, that represents 3 fully loaded 747s crashing every day from cigarette deaths. And that's the active smokers. And then 1 MD-80, that's passive smokers. So people who aren't even smokers, but work in environments where cigarette smoke is, and getting cancer from people's secondhand smoke. All right? So the reason I'm talking about this, and well, what does this have to do with 25-ounce cans? The manufacturers are in business to make money. You are losing hundreds of people a day that have to be replaced with new users. That is, you have to be strung out using their products. All right? So there are other states where they used to sell as a single serving a half a gallon of malt liquor. If you remember the movie Boys in the Hood and the whole 40 ounces that goes along with the whole gang culture, St. Ides, which is featured prominently in Boys in the Hood, a lot of, rappers like Ice Cube, fronting for St. Ides, a 40 ounce of malt liquor is equivalent to a 6-pack. And they were marketing it as a single serving to kids. Okay, so when you do a social recon and you notice that the homeless are drinking 22 to 25 ounce cans of Steel Reserve, is not a single dose.
Hurricane is a popular one.
Hurricane is a popular one too. It is 3 doses. So if they drink 2 of those, it's like drinking a 6-pack. And it's 12% alcohol, which means it's 3 times the strength of Bud Light. The difference between Bud Light and Bud is just that Bud Light has less calories, same amount of alcohol. So understand, these are drug dealers. They kill more people than the cartel, and they're a legitimate business, and their business is protected by law. This information I'm telling you is forbidden to be public knowledge by law. We can't put that, if this were a can of beer, we can't put that there's 3 to 5 doses in this can. You can't put, it's forbidden by law, by an act of Congress. Right? So that's what I call, and we'll talk about this as we talked about it in the class before this, that is 195, induced ignorance addictions, where normal behavior strings you out and causes health problems, right? So it'll be our job as professionals to teach people that and have them be able to translate back and forth what, 25 ounce, let's see. Well, if each dose is 7 ounces and there's 25, how many doses is that? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? You were about to say?
One other thing that was pointed out to me when I was doing research on it was the names of the beers are focused towards the male population. There's only like a few beers that say anything that might be, whatever the word is, to entice women to buy.
Well, yes. So, right. It's called targeted marketing. All right? So you may not know, only a few of you are actually old enough to remember this. Marlboro was a female cigarette when it first came out. Like Virginia Slims is targeted towards women. You don't see guys smoking Virginia Slims. Marlboro was a female cigarette when it first came out. Now, in order to increase sales, they decided to come up with the Marlboro Man. And sales skyrocketed.
And they killed him too.
Well, every successive Marlboro Man, of course, died of cancer.
Oh, yeah?
Right? Yeah, sure. Also, in terms of looking at ethnic minorities, so anybody that's been in prison where cigarettes are currency, you still have the attitude today that menthol cigarettes are for minorities. Where'd that come from? Well, Newport, Salem, Cool, jazz festivals. Who decided that? Well, that's another marketing trick that they use that has now gone into the general population as an unconscious attitude. So if you can imagine a white con, I'm not going to smoke, that's a nigger cigarette. I mean, I'm quoting somebody because it's menthol. Now, the reason that that's an issue besides the race issue is that menthol cigarettes suppress the cough reflex and are more addictive. And so if you don't get treatment, if your population is denied access to treatment, you get sicker. And menthol cigarettes basically promote that by being targeted. So people are unsuspecting that they're being targeted for a more addictive brand of a particular legal product. Right? So, and you will see this, depending on where you go in terms of not only social recon here, but being able to do that in other communities. So the current debate about whether we should privatize liquor sales and have it be like California, where every gas station, et cetera, can sell hard liquor instead of being a state store, be interesting. All right, so while this class was oriented originally to train addictions professionals for working in treatment, treatment has to occur within a setting which is medical, moneyed, educated, compensated, and time limited. Therefore, it becomes like a resource that is rare. So within that box, all right? So most people live outside of the world of treatment, and they live in a world that's not recovery friendly. So different models of treatment have to be developed, like I was talking about the other day. The science says if you have an emotional problem and you've not been taught the skills by your culture to deal with it without drugs or alcohol, America offers you drugs or alcohol to deal with your emotional problems. Therefore, you get addicted. Now, if you legitimately raise those issues in certain forms of treatment where the worldview, and if you look at 12 steps, Not putting them down, but if you look at 12 steps as a comparative model, they don't believe racism exists. And that didn't come from Bill W., because he clearly saw that racism existed. But there are some folks that are uncomfortable with raising that issue. Just like the reason we have women's treatment is because women raising their sexual abuse history 40 years ago in a group were basically accused of defocusing. And of course, they relapsed, right? Same thing. So the people that I was telling you about were, what happens if you're black women? What happens if you're a black woman raised in this community, sexually abused by a person who's calling you ethnic names? You have race and sexual abuse that you're bringing into treatment. So the treatment professional needs to be able to deal with that. And unfortunately, with that particular incident, they weren't. So what that leads to is the situation that a number of us, myself included, have known for years, that black people are not succeeding in treatment in Oregon. And it's not because they have a lack of access to treatment. That is another issue. But it's because of the treatment centers themselves being unwilling to deal with race and poverty as an issue in treatment, as it scientifically, legitimately is. Oh, well, what about poor white people? Yeah, poverty would be an issue, driving that too. That should be addressed in treatment, right? So different models of treatment must be developed. And it doesn't mean that we have to have a poor white people's treatment and a black people's treatment and a Latinos. The law says that you meet the client where they are and you make accommodations for their culture. Whether it's language, whether it's terminology, you do that. So you got me as a teacher, right? So I'm going to teach you to rely on yourself, develop a systems literacy, and become a healer in toxic environments, which also might include your job in a treatment center. Just telling you. There's a reason I don't work in treatment. Because they don't like this message, even though it's scientifically based. So we talked to this issue of cultural competency. So this is in Moodle in a Word file. It's one of the links, and it's entitled "A Few Cultural Competency Resources," and there's actually lots of them. But teaching from this one, so cultural and linguistic competence is one of the core values of systems of care. That means this. However you define culture, and culture basically is a system of patterns, beliefs, technology that's particular to a particular people at a particular type or at time. Okay? So if we apply that to drug culture or addictions, we understand potheads are different than junkies. Meth heads are different than coke heads, even though they're doing the same stimulant types of drugs. There's differences based on class, socioeconomic status, which also means education and occupation. Okay, so all kinds of different forms of culture impact in treatment. So cultural competence is defined as the integration of knowledge, information, and data about individuals and groups of people into clinical standards, skills, service approaches, and supports, policies, measures, and benchmarks that align with the individual's or group's culture and increases the quality, appropriateness, and acceptability of healthcare and outcomes. Now, people, when I've read that before, people say, speak English. Yeah, I am speaking English. Okay? This is college. So you're supposed to be able to understand that. I didn't when I first saw it, and I know the dude that wrote it. Break it down to me in street talk. Okay? That's what we actually have to do. Talk street talk, talk medicine, convert back. Because here's one of the challenges with our field. You can't train street wisdom. And I never claimed to be street. I'm the son of a doctor. So let's be clear about that. Never did time. Because I wasn't allowed to develop a drug problem. Straight up. But I've worked with these kind of populations for 40 years. So you learn something from clients as well as training. All right? So here's how this breaks down. All right? Cultural competence. So the part in the parentheses is how I'm explaining that. Cultural competence is defined as the integration of knowledge. So internal to the culture that we're talking about, whatever that is, and external to the college, to the culture. So inside the culture, why are meth heads a culture to themselves? Good. Say that out louder. They have a way about going about themselves. What can you describe that?
They have a different language, different way to...
Different language, different ways of speaking.
They steal.
They steal. They're not the only ones who steal.
Yeah, but they'll steal from their closest family.
Uh-huh. Well, junkies will do that too. As cokeheads will do that too. As alcohol. Okay, so notice the patterns here, right? So we can have, let me give you a working definition. 2 working definitions out of anthropology, okay? Which is the science within Western civilization that studies culture, human culture, okay? So, emic is an anthropology term from inside the culture. And then etic from outside the culture. Okay, let me give you an example. Anthropology, up until World War II and a little after, was largely academic white people studying everybody else. So they send anthropologists all over the world, and they study like native or indigenous culture, and then they write stuff down. So, like, for example, an anthropologist was talking to some Aboriginal folks in Australia and pointed to that creature. What's the name of that creature? And the guy goes, kangaroo. So Europeans started calling that creature kangaroo. When they finally got around to doing a language study, kangaroo in that guy's language meant, what did he say? Now, there are some Australians, usually white Australians, that say, oh, that's a Yank story. Yank story. Americans saying that. Right? Inside the culture, outside the culture. Okay? Inside women's culture. PMS, putting up with men's stuff. Notice who I got a laugh from. Notice who didn't. Is that real? Is that real? Yeah, it's real, right? Okay, so etic, emic, etic, right? Inside a culture. So the experience that happens inside a culture, people know it, but when people observe outside of the culture, observe the same behavior, they say, oh, all those people are like blah. Okay? So, inside the culture, so this is anthropology. In psychology, we would say this is an archetype. That is the lived experience of the people. And then outside the culture, stereotype. Things that other people say about the same behavior that are from outside the culture. All right? So when I said internal to the culture, external to the culture, notice the difference. And so as an example, within meth culture, it is not uncommon for people to go on what we called in the old days a run. A run would be a continuous methamphetamine session where you could be up for 3 weeks or more. I think the record in my experience with a client reporting being up for 5 weeks. Oh, could be days. Not weeks, but could be days.
3 days.
3 days usually. Yeah, the detox period, the minimum detox period. Okay? So understand this is part of the biopsychosocial model. So what happens to somebody psychologically if they ain't slept for 3 days? Physically. They go insane, right? Because you need REM sleep, you need dream sleep to be able to maintain sanity. And we found out through sleep deprivation, which is also a form of torture, that you start hallucinating after 3 days. Well, what if the drug makes you hallucinate already? Worse, right? So we call it, inside the culture, tweaking. Where you start seeing things that ain't there. Meth monsters, right. All right? So being able to translate, being able to read the culture, and then being able to explain, well, this is what happened with you. This is why it will take 3 years of continuous sobriety for you to recover from that. So, cultural competence defined as the integration of knowledge, internal to the culture and external to the culture. Because sometimes, internal to the culture, they have no explanation. They just said, this weird stuff keeps happening over and over and over. Why does this happen when I do this? So you give the scientific, this is why. Of course, you didn't sleep for 3 weeks. Which might be normal in wartime, which is what the drug was designed for. But it ain't normal in civilian life. There's a reason why you feel paranoid, and it's part of the drug. Or whatever the drug is, right? So we'll learn about that too. So, internal to the culture, and information and data about individuals and groups of people into what we do, clinical standards, that's what we do, clinical standards, skills, service approaches and supports, policies. What a policy is how we agree to address a predictable or unpredictable problem. So if you understand, for example, and we'll be studying this in terms of different systems of isms, policy is an agreement, either written or unwritten, about how we're going to address a problem. And there's unwritten policies. Okay? Some of those unwritten policies is, we're going to treat you differently depending on where your zip code is. We're going to treat you differently depending on whether you're male or female, rich or poor. Now, even though the law says we aren't going to discriminate, discrimination happens. And it's actually predictable. And we were raised. Listen, I was raised with certain biases. I'm a college professor. College is biased towards middle class and up. If you're not middle class, sucks to be you. Can I have that attitude? Have you noticed some of your professors having that attitude? You can say yes. Because I see them having that attitude about y'all. So, understand, if you're in a hostile learning environment, you need to build skills to deal with a professor that ain't as cool. Hopefully that ain't me. But so policies, how we agree to address a predictable or unpredictable problem, measures what happened and what did we do, and benchmarks. How are we progressing, or are we, that align with the individual's or group's culture? That is, how are we doing according to them? Because if the people we're serving say we ain't doing so good, it doesn't matter whether we feel good about it or not. And increases the quality. How good are we doing? Appropriateness is what we're doing the right thing. And acceptability. Do they accept what we're doing of healthcare and outcomes? Did they make the desired change? So, acceptability of healthcare. So if it's a proven scientific fact, if you are teaching people a health behavior and they don't own it, that is, they don't practice it, you haven't done anything. Okay? When you brush your teeth, the standard protocol, 2 minutes for your entire mouth, then floss, then use a mouth rinse. I'm guilty of this. I mean, I even have a toothbrush, an electric toothbrush that it'll stop and say, okay, you got to switch parts of your mouth. Yeah, they've been making those for a long time. And then flossing. Don't always floss. Even though I know that's the best thing to do. Right? So I'm saying we adopt health behaviors or not. Okay? The protocol for safer sex. Safer sex. It's not just using protection each and every time. Safer sex is knowing the infection status of your partner before you have sex. Verified by an independent lab, not their word. Because I'll tell you, like my daddy used to tell me, son, dope fiends lie to you. Right? And people under the influence having sex, they lie to each other. Not the no glove, no love. Give me the report. Give me the HIV test, too. All right, linguistic competence. Linguistic competence is the capacity of an organization and its personnel to communicate effectively and convey information in a manner that is easily understood by diverse audiences, including persons of limited English proficiency, those who have low literacy skills or not literate, and individuals with disabilities. So, for example, addictions is part of the medical profession. Is the client understanding your clinical jargon? So usually in education, limited English proficiency refers to people that speak a language other than English. But sometimes people whose only language is English will tell you stuff like, speak English when you're using technical language. And I could say, look it up in the dictionary, but That would be rude to some people, even though that's how I was raised. Get friendly with a dictionary, because we're part of the medical profession. You better know how to spell it without spell check. Because you're going to be writing official reports. Limited English proficiency, not just non-English speakers. It's also non-technical English speakers. Some professionals are in need of a rectal encephalotomy. It's a form of psychic surgery. Because all they can see is fecal material and they like the view. So rectal encephalotomy literally means it's not an actual surgical procedure. I'm just saying it's the surgical removal of your head from your ass. Some people have their head up their ass because they like the view. All they can see is doo-doo everywhere they go. So you've got to get their head out of their behind so they can actually see what's there. And that's one occupational hazard of this business when you're dealing with people who are in various stages of addiction. It's easy to get cynical and jaded, particularly if you're a sector of society like the PO or police officer who basically sees people at their worst all the time. We're coming out of prison. It's easy to see people at their worst and see the worst in them. But our job is to see the recovered person before they recover. Extreme anti-disestablishmentarianism, so that was a word that I learned in high school. Anti-disestablishmentarianism means that you're for the system, for the establishment, and you're against people that speak out against it.
Why wouldn't it just be establishmentarianism?
Anti-dis, so dis, against the establishment. So you're anti the people that are dissing the establishment.
That makes sense. Building language.
So Terry Cross, a Native American researcher out of Portland State University, came up with a cultural competence continuum. So the model came out of response of ICWA, that is the Indian Child and Welfare Act. So how that worked and what Terry and his colleagues are trying to get people to understand is that systems, and as addictions counselors, we're part of a system, we're often designed to destroy cultures. Cultures that in their existence were non-addictive and healthy. And were destroyed because of that non-addictiveness and healthiness in favor of a norm that produces addicts. Okay? So, it recognizes that some systems are culturally destructive by intent, but they have taken on the appearance of being more benign, that is more friendly, but are actually at least culturally blind, and I'll explain that within his construct. Okay? So, cultural blindness is now the default of most American institutions. Some have been changing. So, from culturally destructive to cultural proficiency. This continuum, just like the range that I was talking about between of the intersex folks, between what we may refer to on one end as hermaphrodites and on the other end, which we put in air quotes, normal, whatever that is. Normal is that that 4 million people are being born intersexed, in addition to having a single set of external genitalia. So, culturally destructive. The negative end of the continuum, there's active participation in the destruction of other cultures. The United States government had an official policy about that against Native populations. It was against the law for Natives to practice their religion before 1978. Federal law. Against the law. Okay? Native elders, chiefs who said, no, we are not trading our land for firewater. First, we don't believe in real estate. Human beings can't own land. You didn't make the land. Creator made the land. You can only own something you made. So that means you can't own sunlight, water. All that stuff is for everybody to use and not just humans. So one, we don't believe in real estate. Two, we are not trading our land for whiskey. In fact, we never use whiskey. We don't want your whiskey. So forget that. We ain't trading no whiskey for land. No, we ain't doing that. We ain't signing your treaty. No, neither. Because we don't believe in giving up land. You can hang out with us. Government wasn't down with that. So the people who wouldn't trade whiskey and counseled the tribe not to do that were captured or killed. Children were taken away from their homes and raised where their hair was cut. If they were sexually abused, and if they spoke their language, their mouth was washed out with lye or soap. They were often killed, never returned to their parents. That was 2 generations ago. That was official United States government policy. At the same time, the United States allowed alcohol to be flooded onto those reservations in clear violation of federal law. Not only was it illegal for Native Americans to practice their religion before 1978, it was also illegal for them to drink alcohol by federal law before 1952. So reservations were flooded with alcohol, with the clear knowledge of Congress, full knowledge of Congress by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. So what happens if your population never had alcohol and suddenly got flooded with whiskey? Your kids got taken away. You were not allowed to practice your religion. What do you think would happen? So when we have the stereotypes of the drunken Indians, that's part of U.S. government policy. Okay, so Terry's model, cultural destructiveness, that happened to us. All right? Cultural incapacity, a paternal posture towards groups in the minority. Ignorance of and unrealistic fear of people of color. Lower expectations of culturally different clients. Oh, well, that's their culture. They can't succeed in treatment. I've had colleagues at Lane Community College talk about people coming from, well, it's not only people at Lane Community College, but when I was first called in to consult at the John Serbu Center, it wasn't called Serbu, it was called Skipworth Department of Youth Services. There were people that said to my face, well, I don't know what all this interest in cultural competency is. All I have to do is get a suntan and I'll understand their culture better than they do. This is from a redhead dude. And the guy next to him, I don't know what all this focus on culture is. These people come from a criminal culture. And that criminal culture is the same as their ethnicity.
Eugene and Springfield.
No, he's saying that juveniles of color come from a criminal culture and that if they're black, Latino, and Native American, those cultures are inherently criminal. This was taught in colleges in the 1940s and 50s so that I could get an idea of when this person went to school. But when we're having this conversation was in 1993. Oh, and you're a juvenile PO. Like maybe still. I'm just saying. Okay, this construct, Terry Koss's construct, was then, 5 years old. And they were saying, maybe you need to check that idea. Because I'm the son of a doctor, and I don't remember African Americans being particularly criminal culture because I don't know any criminals or have any criminals in my family. But, hey, whatever. Cultural incapacity. Cultural blindness. Color or culture makes no difference. Belief that conventional approaches are universally applicable despite past history. Ignores cultural strengths. Blames culture and client for the problem. This is the default setting for most American institutions up till pretty much this point until the demographic started changing. Cultural blindness. Oh, we see everybody the same. Like everybody. And so if you can't fit in the model, and the model is based on a middle-class white male model, look, Sigmund Freud thought that normal human psychology is white, upper-class, male, European. That if you're female, you're crazy. And the treatment was heroin. That was official policy in the United States. Women were hysterical, so, we had over-the-counter cough syrup with heroin in it. So y'all women, to cure your hysteria, need to be strung out. Wish I was making that up. Okay, so the science has changed a little, I think. But you need to know the history. I'm telling you the history because some of those attitudes still exist. Cultural blindness. Cultural pre-competence. It attempts to improve some aspect of service. It may believe that the accomplishment of one goal or activity, that is, hiring a particular staff member, writing a mission statement, diversity is one of our core values, fulfills the obligation to communities of color or different cultural groups. A few things. That's cultural pre-competence. So, the minimal standard that we operate on, that I teach to, is cultural competency. It's a skill. So, as an example, clinical supervision today. I supervise a doctoral student. Can I see a show of hands? Am I the first African American professor in your academic career? Yeah. Okay. All right. Common experience for me here. So, the doctoral student that I'm supervising is Latina. She's a PhD student. She also works at Centro. We have a client from a town near here. And his experience at Lane Community College is he never encountered any African Americans in his life before coming here. Before coming to Lane.
Where's he from?
Does it matter? It's within 10-mile radius of here. Okay? All right? 10 miles, let's say 15 miles. What is that? Marquette, Cottage Grove, Cresswell, Veneta, Marcola, Junction City. Does it matter? It doesn't matter. All right? If you never encountered African Americans before coming to Lane Community College, his default setting, he said, I hope I'm not being too PC or what. Well, PC, okay, all right. Well, I don't know how to talk to them. And I don't want to be perceived as racist, because some people say, What do you people want to be called? I mean, that's a legitimate question if you're from small town Oregon and you never actually met anybody, because where are you going to learn that in Marcola? And all you see is Yo MTV Raps. That's your own, or Cops. That's your only experience of African American is cable, which this is a common experience. I'm just saying. So she's able, but he, says, well, there are Hispanics or Latinos or Mexican. Well, she's okay. Not all Mexicans. Okay, so just get that straight. So, she's in a counseling relationship with this person. And so I'm using that as a story to show you, look, that's a common experience. And it doesn't mean that you're racist just because you've never met one. And that race isn't the only aspect of culture, but it's a major one in America because people don't have skill with it. Okay? So, cultural competence. You accept and respect cultural diversity, that it exists, and that you develop a skill set, continuous self-assessment for knowledge, skills, and building, and skill building. So for knowledge and skill building, actively involves cultural groups and allows the use of culturally specific technology. Okay, so whatever that culturally specific technology is. And that might mean certain constructs, like cultural competency, coming out of the Native community. But he's a PhD, and so he's done research. So it's validated within the scientific community too, and adopted as practice within the medical field. I had an eye doctor that said, oh, you're African American, you have type 2 diabetes, you probably have a predisposition, do you have a family history? Yes. Predisposition towards glaucoma, take these eye drops. These eye drops are well tolerated by African Americans. There's a knowledge base. Wow, a white optometrist that's coming at me like that? That's cool. Good. Cultural proficiency. Holds cultures in high esteem, assists others in developing cultural competence, advocates for cultural responsiveness throughout systems, and further, so obviously in order to be culturally competent, to teach you cultural competence, I can't be culturally competent by myself. I have to be culturally proficient to teach you cultural competence. Okay, so cultural proficiency also means not only do you use the culturally specific technology, but you develop new technology that a culture might not have. Like the logger from Pendleton. What's your T cell count? Huh? What's a T cell? Well, you're HIV positive. They didn't teach you anything else besides HIV positive? Okay, here's how you keep your T cell count down while maintaining your recovery. Okay, cultural proficiency. So, as I point out here, the default position for many mainstream institutions in America is cultural blindness. Okay, so many American institutions, particularly the military, justice systems, corrections, law enforcement, and healthcare industries have practiced cultural destructiveness or cultural incapacity historically. Some of those policies still exist in another form. So that's why we advocate for cultural competence. Okay? Some of these have improved to cultural pre-competence. They've done a few things. All right? So I want to give you two other words here. The difference between discernment and discrimination. Discernment is noticing that there are differences. The floor is different than the ceiling, except in space, where the floor can become the ceiling. Here on Earth, the floor is different from the ceiling. Tables are different than chairs. There's differences. This is a cup. That's a bottle. Pen, pencil. Fender Stratocaster. Gibson ES 335. Hendricks, Ingve. All right? Perception of difference, discernment. Discrimination is positive or negative values assigned to difference. The table is better than the chair. The floor is better than the ceiling. Hendricks shreds Ingve. Huh? The whole thing? Okay, so discrimination. You assign a positive value to some things and a negative value to others. That might be equal in another framework, or they're just different, that's all. It's like saying, okay, hurricane. I'm not in recovery, so you understand that I wouldn't drink hurricane. I would drink Chimay. You know, so I'm not in recovery, so I buy $10 bottles of beer because I have a discriminating taste, because I can afford a $10 bottle of beer. Because whenever I drink beer, once every 6 months, I want a good beer, not crap. That's discrimination. Discriminating taste. You want a Chardonnay more than Night Train. You want a Mondavi Petit Syrah rather than Red Mountain or Ripple or Boone's Farm. That's discriminating, right? One's better, one's not, right? Now, it might be a matter of taste, but that's discrimination, all right? You're putting a positive or negative value on something that's probably the same. Look, it's all alcohol. It's designed to get you sloshed. What does taste really mean? Is Kush better than pineapple? Obviously not potheads here, huh? Okay. All right. In the 1970s, the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights came up with a definition. Prejudice plus power equals racism. Now, they were talking about racism at the time, but this can be mimetically transferred to other systems of discrimination, as we'll see either later today or next week. So the idea is this. They're saying that everyone has prejudice. Everyone. There are things you like, there are things you don't like. But they're saying that some people have the power to enforce their prejudices on others. And this is where it becomes an ism. All right, so prejudice plus power. Now, we can have arguments about who has power and what doesn't, but that basic equation, prejudice plus power equals racism, but I'm also expanding that to say an ism is an individual attitude, a structural reality which combine to create a mentality. So ism is a suffix. So if you take that individual, then structural, societal mentality as a suffix comes at the end of the word, put another word, at the beginning you have sexism, racism, classism. Okay, you have a modifier and a suffix, right? So there's 6 types of isms, which we'll get into. Before we get into that, write this down. It's not what's wrong with you. It's what happened to you. We are counselors. We hear horrific stories. The client is not their diagnosis. They are a person that had stuff happen to them. And they're trying to make a sane adjustment to an insane situation. And giving them a psychological label or a medication does not necessarily give them the skill to do that. Okay, so it's not what's wrong with you, it's what happened to you. This is a phrase that came out of a black female run 12-step treatment program in Oregon that wasn't just treating black women, but also white women who were sexually abused, who often blame themselves for what happened to them. No, it's not what's wrong with you, it's what happened to you. All right? So trauma often drives addictive behavior. The reason I gave you that definition of isms is because there are systems that produce trauma as part of their normal operation. They produce trauma. Basic train. Anybody in the military? Military. Basic training in any other context is abuse. People yelling and screaming, talking about your mama, calling you out your name, that is physical and psychological abuse. Designed to make you feel nothing and killing people. And I am not against military service, but think about it. Think about what it's designed to do. You're not supposed to feel empathy with the enemy. Okay, maybe it's my part. I believe that human nature is essentially good, so that we have qualms against killing people. But military training trains you differently. That's why police are military organizations. They have to use and have been empowered to use deadly force. And they often may regret it, but there it is, right? So, trauma often drives addictive behavior. To heal their trauma, you must look at your own trauma and not be triggered by theirs. Ow. Owie. Okay? Or, if you are triggered by their trauma, be able to see the way out so that you can't get stuck. So let's talk about various types of trauma. VT, PTSD, PSSD, MGT. I'll break them down. VT is vicarious trauma. This is the one that we often deal with. So vicarious trauma is this. So vicarious trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder, post-slavery stress disorder, multi-generational trauma.
What's the post-slavery stress disorder?
Okay, so I'll get to that. So you got that? And move on? This will be up today, so. All right, so PTSD. I start there because this is the one you probably heard of, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, post-traumatic stress disorder. So, let's talk about it in street talk. Really bad stuff happened to you personally. And you couldn't be, so psychologically, when real bad stuff happens to you, that is often shattering to who you are as a person. In order to live with it, you have to forget about it. So here's one of the keys in recognizing this in clients. When they can't remember major sections of their childhood that they reasonably should remember, something happened to cause them to forget. There's a reason they're forgetting. And it's probably something bad. Okay? PTSD.
So it may not be necessarily the drugs they use after that help them to forget?
Well, they might have used the drugs to try and help them forget. Or they had a scary experience that they may use. So, for example, I had a client the other day that basically he didn't characterize it as a bad acid trip, but something he saw on LSD scared him into, and the only way that he could get rid of that feeling was by doing heroin.
What?
I've seen it before. That's not uncommon.
How does heroin help with that?
Heroin, okay, is designed to be a painkiller, but the pain is not just physical. It also stops psychological pain. It numbs it.
How long did he do it like right after his acid trip?
He basically identified that as the triggering for his heroin habit. And so we talked about that. So here's a skill, all right? Whenever you basically find that somebody has done a psychedelic like LSD, you want to find out whether they had a bad trip. And what happened on that trip. Because it might not sound so bad to you, like, okay, you know I'm experienced, so I didn't have a bad trip on acid, but, it was, there's certain rules with LSD. Don't look at the sun. Don't look in a mirror. They're unwritten rules, from back in the day, right? Don't trip without somebody babysitting you. So I looked in the mirror. What's so bad about looking in the mirror? I hallucinated turning into the devil. Flames and everything. Tail. Right? That tripped me out. And then I turned into an angel. Then a devil. Then an angel. Then a devil. Back and forth in living color with rainbows and flames. Okay? What would that do to you if you saw that? That was scary. Then oh, okay, good and evil in me. All right.
Yeah.
Boom. All right. And I had a way of explaining that traumatic experience I got out of it. Okay? This guy experienced on acid an incredible emptiness. A big black hole that was scary to him because he couldn't see into it. And he felt, well, maybe my life has no meaning. Maybe my life is empty. And that's a conclusion that he drew. Well, if my life is meaningless, I can't face that life is meaningless, so that hurts. That hurts. So, boom, big existential dread hurt, covered up with heroin. Now that might not sound logical, but it's emotional. That explained his trauma, right? Okay. So there was a way out for that particular thing. But that's from a PTSD experience based on LSD. Now, there are other people that have other drug experiences that are traumatic. Yes?
I was going to say, yeah, drugs are a cycle. I've heard of people doing heroin to down off of meth, like if they do too much meth and they're too hyped up, then they do heroin to like fall asleep or something.
Yeah. Sure. Yes. That's an American drug, one American drug site. So, post-traumatic stress disorder. Really bad stuff happened to you. Post-slavery stress disorder. Really bad stuff. So basically where PSSD came from is Joy DeGruy at Portland State University, who, while as a social worker, was taking a class on PTSD and recognized, so PTSD is when really bad stuff happened to you and you are not given time or counseling to process or heal from it. And you get re-triggered by stimulation that's very similar to your traumatic event. My first racial attack occurred in Disneyland.
Oh my god.
No.
It wasn't the happiest place on earth.
Not in 1962.
I've heard a lot of like racial things going on
Well,
in Disneyland, like that.
Yeah. Well, what happened to me is I'm in the Alice in Wonderland teacups. And I'm standing in line with my uncle, getting ready to get on the Alice in Wonderland teacups. And I'm wearing a hoodie because it's an overcast day in LA, right? And there's this dude smoking behind me with, a little kid in line. I didn't, I smiled at the kid and smiled up the dude. He didn't smile back. Okay.
They can do that.
They could in 1962. So, after a while, I noticed that the smoking smell still was gone. He got out of line as soon as I smiled at him. He had dropped his lit cigarette in my hoodie and walked away. And my uncle, stripped off the hoodie, put it out and all that kind of stuff. And then, later when we got back home, my parents explained to me what had happened. And that was the first time I ever heard. What? You mean, wait, some white people don't like me because I'm black? I mean, this was a big thing for my romper room. Not all of you are old enough to remember romper room. Before Sesame Street, before, Reading Rainbow, there was romper room. To wrap my 7-year-old romper room mind, well, what about Mrs. Eastwood? The nice white ladies that gave us Easter baskets and Christmas. No, they're cool. What about my friends on the... They're cool. Well, how do I tell which white people don't like me? Southern accents? What? Right? So I had to take my 8-year-old to the Alice in Wonderland teacups. And I hadn't been back there since I was 7. Now I'm 35. I was 35 when that happened, taking my kid to the teacups. Oh, we can't go because... No, but, I remember that moment. Right? So, PTSD. So, that was a PTSD flashback, right? Trauma, right? Post-slavery stress disorder. So, Joy DeGruy is taking a class and she's realizing, wait, these symptoms come from PTSD where you have fits of unexplained anger, you could be violent, you could be all these things, you could have unexplained grief, you could have all these things. Wait, black people have had all that stuff. But we haven't been allowed to heal from slavery. And her teacher said, no, you're crazy. Well, no, really. These symptoms are happening, and according to your construct, we're going through PTSD. I'm going through PTSD. I'm going through PTSD. Because we haven't ever been allowed to heal, and it wasn't even acknowledged, and still isn't acknowledged to this day, that we had this happen to us. Oh yeah, you went to slavery. Slavery's over. Get over it. That's what they tell people in PTSD. Oh, get over it. The war is over. Get over it. Yeah. Oh, rape. That happened a long time ago. Get over it. That's what get over it. All right, so post-slavery stress disorder. She said, okay, here's what happens. Really bad stuff happened to your people. Slavery, attempted genocide, continued oppression, no time or space to recover from it, and you're still suffering. Here are the signs and symptoms. Boom, wrote a whole book and then a workbook on how to deal with that. MGT, multi-generational trauma. This came out of Indian country. Genocide happened to your people and you are surviving it. Whole range of signs and symptoms. The boarding school experience, what I was telling you, for example, people having their hair cut, mouth washed off with soap, being sexually abused by the Catholics or Mormons or whoever is running the boarding school, kidnapped, then their kids get taken away, and multi-generational domestic violence, et cetera, multi-generational trauma. And now, through this construct and through epigenetics, we find that many European cultures, Irish, Scots, Germans, Scandinavians with heavy drinking, have this same thing too. But it hasn't been acknowledged. But scientists of color, yeah, white folks, you got reasons to be traumatized. You did get traumatized. It did happen to you. Not your imagination. And you still ain't got over it any more than we got over it. There's hope.
Does that skip generations when, like, the Irish and
It
stuff?
skips generations in the sense that not every generation will express it, but it's in the genome. Not every generation will express the same symptoms, but it's possible. I've had clients that basically, they're not the alcoholics, but there's alcoholics on either side of them.
Right, so my husband's a German.
Mm-hmm.
His father wasn't an alcoholic, but he's a full-blooded alcoholic. It's a chemical thing or, genetic
You
thing.
are inheriting a genetic tolerance for alcohol that we've proven scientifically. Okay? But there might be other things than just that drug tolerance that are getting passed on. So, vicarious trauma. You empathize with the stories people tell you, and you internalize their stress as your stress. It changes, huh?
Codependency.
Yeah. Codependency is a form of vicarious trauma. It changes how you see and patterns your brain into a continual stress response. So I started with this in terms of the definition because as counselors, this is the type of trauma that we will encounter as part of our practice. But I ended with it to let you know that if you run into people with the other types of trauma, don't be surprised if it triggers a response in you. But we're being trained to be able to see a way out of it. All right, so the underlying expectation. You're taking this class to be able to help people out with their unresolved or untreated problems. This means you can't necessarily have the same untreated problems they have or untreated major problems while taking, for example, this class, because it will get intellectually and emotionally rough for you. So don't forget to do good self-care, whatever that self-care is for you. Okay, so it's probably not a great idea to try and take this class to help yourself out with your own problems, because you might get triggered by them. So, people also have taken this class under the influence. This ain't cat and mouse to see whether you can get away with it. It's your life. So if you cannot stop using addictively by the medical definition of addiction, you should get out now while the getting's good. It don't cost you more money. But actually, Sunday was the time that you could have dropped. So we gotcha. So the other piece is there is no attendance requirement, but if you have dropped out of the class and are not taking it, this is going out to y'all that ain't here, I'm not going to drop you. I didn't enroll you. You need to drop yourself. So, if you're staying, I expect you to perform with a certain level of headedness. This is life or death we're dealing with. Okay? So I ain't playing. So you shouldn't be neither. Okay, so biopsychosocial is a clinical evaluation. So that's the standard. Take a person's story, convert it into medical language, create a treatment plan so that the person can have a healthy outcome. Even if you're making the person up. How does this have a more healthy outcome? When I talk about cultural competencies, like, I'm not scared of people who have issues with me because of my excellent suntan. I'm not that 7-year-old in Disneyland anymore. I have skinheads and Klansmen as clients. So, I'm over that part. Okay, you don't have to like me, but here's the science. Drinking a fifth of vodka a day is going to kill you. Sorry, I'm the one to tell you that. Oh well. So this means they, the client, have to understand, and any medical professional can understand as well when you record what's going on. So convert street talk into medical terminology and then back. Because they're different cultures.
So do we use your terminology that you used in class, or do we get into the medical books and pull up terminology? I mean,
I gave you some of the language already.
Right.
Okay? So be able to translate back and forth. As appropriate. And that might change. That's like what I said. When he led with 25 ounces, okay, how many doses is that? Okay, you need to understand how many doses of alcohol are in a container. Because they don't get the doses part. To explain that, look, all alcohol problems are an overdose problem. And you are taught to overdose so that people can make money. Now, I'm not an alcoholic because I'm from LA. I don't trust people. And I certainly am not going to drink to a blackout, because a blackout means I have to trust other drunk people around me that are strangers with my life. Seriously? Really? No. Not going to happen. But lots of people drink to blackouts all the time. And I'm going, why would you do that? Why are you surprised what happened? Okay, so here's the technical language. A CT-PT. CT means client. PT means patient. Presents with certain SX, not sex, symptoms. Based on their HX, their history. HX means history. Okay? It's all defined here. And they're playing music, so I'm supposed to get out now. All right? See you Tuesday.